Hey everyone, welcome back. Get comfortable tonight because this one is going to take a while, and I think it is going to be worth it. I want to talk about South Park, not the South Park you half watch while scrolling your phone at 2 in the morning. Not the South Park that your uncle quotes badly at Thanksgiving. I want to talk about the version of South Park that was, for about 7 years, the sharpest, bravest, funniest thing on American television. And I want to talk about what happened to it, because what happened to South Park is one of the strangest stories in the history of television. It is a story about two guys who had absolutely nothing, who built something extraordinary out of construction paper and profanity and a willingness to offend every single person on the planet in equal measure. And then it is the story of what happened when those two guys became billionaires. Not metaphorical billionaires. Actual, Forbes-confirmed $1.2 billion each billionaires. Here is the argument I want to make tonight, and I want to be upfront about it because I think it deserves to be stated clearly rather than hinted at for an hour. South Park's golden age was not killed by bad writing. It was not killed by laziness or creative exhaustion or running out of ideas. It was killed by success. Specifically, by the way success slowly dismantled every single condition that had made the golden age possible in the first place. And here's what makes this story different from every other show-peaked early and declined story you have ever heard. The creators never left. Trey Parker has written 325 of the show's 338 episodes. He has directed 317 of them. He and Matt Stone have been the showrunners for all 28 seasons. There have been 0 showrunner changes, 0, in 28 years. They stayed in the room, they kept writing, they kept directing, they kept doing the voices. They are still there right now, and the show still changed. That is what makes this worth talking about. Because it means the problem is not as simple as the creator got bored and walked away. The problem is what success does to the conditions around a creator, even one who stays, even one who cares. Even one who is still sitting in that writer's room at 3 in the morning trying to finish an episode before Wednesday night. To understand what I mean by that, you need to understand where South Park came from. And where it came from is a place so far removed from where it is now that the distance almost does not feel real. South Park was created by 2 college kids from Colorado. Trey Parker grew up in Conifer, a small mountain town south of Denver. He was interested in film and music from the time he was a kid. He spent a semester at Berklee College of Music in Boston before transferring to the University of Colorado Boulder, where he enrolled as a film major. Matt Stone grew up in Littleton, just outside Denver. He was a math major at CU Boulder. They met in a film class where students were required to collaborate on projects. Parker later said they bonded immediately over Monty Python and a shared love of provocative, anti-authoritarian humor. They started making short films together almost right away. Parker said they shot a film nearly every week, though he admitted he had since lost most of them. His very first film was called Giant Beavers of Southern Sri Lanka, which he described as a Godzilla-style rampage parody featuring beavers. A fellow student later said the idea nearly got Parker laughed out of class. After college, they moved to Los Angeles. And this is where the story gets important, because what happened in Los Angeles is the thing that made everything else possible. And it is also the thing that success would eventually take away. They were broke, not quirky, charming, Hollywood broke. Actually broke. Stone slept on dirty laundry for over a year because he could not afford to buy a mattress. They pitched ideas that nobody wanted. They tried to sell a children's program called Time Warp to Fox Kids, which would have involved fictionalized stories about people in history. Nobody bought it. Fox Kids disbanded as a division before anything came of it. They made a low-budget musical called Cannibal, the musical in 1993. It did not make them rich or famous. Then, in 1995, they created something that changed everything. It was a short, animated film called Jesus vs. Santa, the sequel to an even earlier short they had made in 1992 called Jesus vs. Frosty. Both of them were made using actual construction paper, cut out and animated by hand in stop motion. The animation was crude, the humor was filthy. The premise was that Jesus Christ and Santa Claus were in a physical fight over the true meaning of Christmas. It was 5 minutes long, and it looked like something made by talented children with no budget, which is exactly what it was. That short spread through early internet file sharing in a way that almost nothing had spread before. This was 1995. There was no YouTube, there was no social media. People were passing this thing around on floppy disks and early email chains and file servers. It became one of the first genuinely viral videos in the history of the internet, years before anyone had a word for what going viral meant. The short caught the attention of Doug Herzog, the president of Comedy Central. He invited Parker and Stone to create a series. They produced a pilot episode called Cartman Gets an Anal Probe. And here is a detail that matters for everything that comes later. That pilot was made using actual construction paper and traditional stop-motion photography. It took 3 months to complete. It looked handmade because it was handmade. The animation was jerky and imprecise and crude in a way that felt completely unlike anything else on television. It was not trying to look professional, it was trying to be funny, and it was trying to be honest, and the roughness of it was part of what made it feel alive. South Park premiered on Comedy Central on August 13th, 1997. The debut episode drew a 1.3 Nielsen rating, which was high for basic cable at the time, but not extraordinary. Then something happened that nobody had predicted. The ratings climbed. They climbed fast. By the 10th episode of the first season, the Nielsen rating had reached 6.4. The most watched episode of those early seasons, Cartman's Mom is a Dirty Slut, and its sequel, Cartman's Mom is Still a Dirty Slut, drew approximately 6.2 to 6.4 million viewers with an 8.2 Nielsen rating. That was a record for non-sports programming on basic cable. The impact on Comedy Central was immediate and enormous. Before South Park, Comedy Central had approximately 9 million subscribers. Within a year of the show's premiere, that number had jumped to 50 million. South Park did not just become a hit show, it transformed the entire network that aired it. It became the first weekly television program to be rated TVMA, a rating that had not existed in any practical sense before the show demanded it. And all of this, every bit of it, was being made by two guys in their late 20s who had been sleeping on dirty laundry and eating cheap food and failing at every pitch they had ever made until one construction paper short film went viral on floppy disks. That is where the golden age came from. Not from resources, not from institutional support, not from a carefully designed creative strategy, from hunger, from desperation, from the specific kind of energy that only exists when you have genuinely nothing to lose and no reason to believe that the thing you are making will last. That energy is what made South Park extraordinary. And that energy, as we will see over the next couple of hours, is the one thing that a billion-dollar empire cannot buy back once it is gone. If you are settling in for the night, get comfortable. We have a long way to go. And if you are already starting to drift off, that is perfectly fine. That is what this is for. Before we get into what the Golden Age actually was and why those specific years produced work that still holds up better than almost anything in the history of animated television, we need to spend a little more time with Parker and Stone in those early years. Because what they built during that period, the production process, the creative philosophy, the specific relationship with their audience and their network, is the foundation that everything else rests on. And you cannot understand why success damaged the show unless you first understand exactly what the show was when success had not yet arrived. Trey Parker was born on October 19, 1969 in Conifer, Colorado. Matt Stone was born on May 26, 1971 in Houston, Texas, though his family moved to Littleton, Colorado when he was young. Parker's father was a geologist. Stone's father was an economics professor, and his mother was a homemaker who later worked in human resources. If you are a fan of the show, you might recognize those family details. The characters Gerald and Sheila Broflovsky, the parents of Kyle, one of the 4 main boys, were named after Stone's actual parents. That kind of detail, the way real life quietly fed into the show from the very beginning, is something worth keeping in mind as we go. Parker attended Evergreen High School, where he was already interested in filmmaking. After his semester at Berkeley and his transfer to CU Boulder, he threw himself into the film program. He was not a casual student. He and Stone were making things constantly: short films, sketches, bits of animation. Parker majored in both film and Japanese. Stone was doing a double major in mathematics and film. The film major had started as an exploratory choice, but the partnership with Parker turned it into the foundation of his career. Their first major collaboration was a feature-length film called Cannibal, the musical, which Parker wrote and directed in 1993. It was a comedic musical about the real historical figure Alfred Packer, a prospector in the 1870s who was convicted of cannibalism in the Colorado mountains. The film was made on an extremely small budget. It was rough around the edges in every possible way. It was also, if you watch it now, clearly the work of people who had genuine talent and absolutely no resources and were making up for the gap between the two with sheer energy. That combination, talent plus poverty plus energy, is the formula that would define everything Parker and Stone made for the next decade. After Cannibal, they moved to Los Angeles. The struggle there was real, and it lasted years. They were pitching constantly and getting nowhere. The Time Warp children's show that they tried to sell to Fox Kids went nowhere. Stone, as I mentioned, was sleeping on a pile of dirty laundry because he could not afford a mattress. Parker was not in much better shape. They connected with a lawyer from the William Morris Agency, who introduced them to producer Scott Rudin, which gave them representation. But representation did not immediately translate into work. Then came the short films that changed everything. In 1992, while still at CU Boulder, they had made a short called Jesus vs. Frosty. It was animated with construction paper in a style inspired by Terry Gilliam's Paper, cut-out animations from Monty Python's Flying Circus. The characters in it were rough prototypes of what would eventually become the Boys of South Park. It was crude and funny and absolutely unlike anything being made at that time. In 1995, they made a second short called Jesus vs. Santa, which was essentially a more polished version of the same idea. Jesus and Santa fighting over Christmas, animated with construction paper, voiced by Parker and Stone, and filled with the kind of profanity and blasphemy that would have been completely impossible on any broadcast television network at the time. This short was commissioned by Fox executive Brian Graden as a video Christmas card. Graden paid them a few $1,000s to make it. He sent it to his friends copied it and sent it to their friends. And then it spread in a way that nobody controlled or predicted. Remember, this was 1995. The internet existed, but barely in the form we know it today. There was no streaming, there was no YouTube. People were sharing this short on VHS tapes and floppy disks and early email attachments. It traveled through Hollywood like a rumor. Executives were passing it around offices. Comedy writers were watching it at parties. It became, in a very real sense, one of the first viral videos in history years before the concept of a viral video had a name. Doug Herzog, who was running Comedy Central at the time, saw it. He understood immediately what he was looking at. Two guys with genuine comedic talent, a style of animation that was completely unique, and a willingness to say things that nobody else on television would say. He brought Parker and Stone in and ordered a series. The pilot, Cartman Gets an Anal Probe, was produced using actual construction paper cutouts photographed in stop motion. It took 3 months to create. The process was painstaking and slow, and the result was something that looked completely handmade because it was. Every subsequent episode of the first season was made using a combination of the same physical cutout technique and early computer animation. By the second season, the show had transitioned almost entirely to computer animation, but the visual aesthetic was carefully preserved. They used software like CorelDRAW and Alias Power Animator on Silicon Graphics workstations to digitize the construction paper look. Later, from season 5 onward, they switched entirely to Autodesk Maya, which they still use today. The whole point was to keep the jerky, two-dimensional, handmade quality that the original cutout style had created. The animation was supposed to look crude. That crudeness was not a limitation, it was the style. The show premiered on August 13th, 1997, and the response was unlike anything Comedy Central had experienced. The ratings trajectory in that first season tells a story on its own. A 1.3 Nielsen rating for the premiere, then climbing episode by episode until it hit 6.4 by the 10th episode. At its late 1990s peak, South Park held the highest ratings of any basic cable program, period. The record-setting episodes from those early seasons drew over 6 million viewers. Comedy Central's subscriber base exploded from around 9 million to 50 million households in roughly 1 year. The network essentially transformed from a niche cable channel into a major player in American television. And it happened because of one show made by two guys from Colorado who had been eating ramen and sleeping on laundry piles less than 2 years earlier. To put the speed of that transformation in perspective, consider where Comedy Central was before South Park. It was a small cable channel, best known for reruns of stand-up specials and a fledgling late-night show. It was not on the cultural radar in any meaningful way. South Park did not just give Comedy Central a hit show. It gave the network a reason to exist. It gave advertisers a reason to buy time. It gave cable operators a reason to carry the channel. Every subsequent Comedy Central success, from The Daily Show to Chappelle's Show to Key and Peele, owes some debt to the audience infrastructure that South Park built. The show did not just succeed, it created the conditions for other shows to succeed after it. That kind of impact is not something you can plan for or manufacture. It happens when the right creative energy meets the right moment, and the collision produces something that changes the landscape. The theatrical film, South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut, arrived in 1999. Parker and Stone wrote, directed, and performed in it. It was a full musical. The songs were genuinely good. One of them, Blame Canada, was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Song. The film grossed approximately $83 million worldwide on a budget of $21 million. It entered the 2001 Guinness Book of World Records for the most swearing in an animated film. And here is where we need to stop and look at the conditions very carefully, because the conditions in which all of this was created are the conditions that the golden age would be built on. And those conditions were about to produce something extraordinary. Parker and Stone were young. Parker was 27 when the show premiered. Stone was 26. They were not yet wealthy in any meaningful sense. The early episodes were being produced for approximately $250,000 to $300,000 each, which is extremely modest by animation standards. They had no safety net. They had no diversified business empire to fall back on. They had South Park, and South Park had them, and neither party knew how long the arrangement would last. The production process they developed during these early years is one of the most unusual in the history of television, and it is absolutely central to understanding what made the golden age possible. Starting with Season 4, South Park adopted what became known as the 6-day production cycle. A standard animated television show takes 8 to 9 months to produce a single episode. South Park made each episode in roughly 6 days. The cycle worked like this. On Thursday morning, the writing team would gather to brainstorm concepts. Parker would draft the script. Over the following days, approximately 70 people, animators, editors, sound engineers, would work what were described as 100 to 120-hour weeks. The finalized episode was transmitted via satellite uplink to Comedy Central on Wednesday, sometimes arriving just hours before the 10 p.m. broadcast. This process was documented in a 2011 documentary called 6 Days to Air, The Making of South Park, which premiered on Comedy Central on October 9th of that year. This production schedule was, by any normal standard, insane. It was unsustainable in the way that all great creative sprints are unsustainable. It was the production equivalent of writing a term paper the night before it is due, except the term paper was a 22-minute animated television episode being watched by millions of people. But the insanity of the schedule was also its genius, because that 6-day turnaround meant that South Park could respond to current events in near real time. Something could happen in the news on a Thursday and be satirized on television the following Wednesday. No other animated show could do that. No other animated show has ever been able to do that. The Simpsons takes months. Family Guy takes over a year. South Park could turn an episode around in less than a week. That speed created a kind of electricity in the writing. There was no time for second guessing. There was no time for focus groups or network notes or careful deliberation about whether a joke might offend someone. The clock was always running, the deadline was always approaching. And that constant, unrelenting pressure forced a kind of creative honesty that more comfortable production schedules tend to smooth away. You cannot be cautious when you have 6 days. You have to trust your instincts. You have to commit to the bit. You have to swing hard because there is no time to swing carefully. Parker and Stone were the creative center of all of this. Parker wrote virtually every episode himself. Stone co-wrote 28 across the entire run. There were other writers, talented ones. David Goodman contributed to 79 episodes in the early years. Nancy Pimental worked on 56. But the creative vision was always Parker's, filtered through his partnership with Stone. There were no showrunner changes. There were no creative regime shifts. The same two people who had made Jesus vs. Santa in 1995 were making every creative decision on the show a decade later. That consistency is extraordinary in television, and it meant that the show's identity never fractured the way shows fracture when new leadership arrives with new ideas about what the characters should be. The final condition worth noting from this period is the one that might matter most of all. Parker and Stone were willing to risk everything. They did not just push boundaries as a marketing strategy or a brand identity. They pushed boundaries because they genuinely did not care if they got fired. They had been broke. They had failed. They knew what failure felt like, and they knew they could survive it. That knowledge, the lived experience of having had nothing and having survived it, gave them a kind of creative fearlessness that money cannot purchase. You cannot buy the willingness to put Isaac Hayes out of a job by making an episode about Scientology. You cannot buy the willingness to animate the Prophet Muhammad on a major television network and then deal with genuine death threats from extremist organizations. You can only do those things when the fear of losing everything has already been replaced by the knowledge that you have already lost everything once and came out the other side. That is what the Golden Age was built on. Youth, poverty, speed, creative control, fearlessness born from failure, and the specific, unrepeatable energy of two young men who had nothing to protect and nothing to lose. Every single one of those conditions was about to change. There is a specific window of time that fans and critics point to when they talk about South Park at its best. The Golden Age, seasons 5 through 11, roughly 2001 to 2007. If you look at the highest rated episodes on any review aggregator, if you look at what won the Emmy Awards, if you look at what people still quote and reference and argue about decades later, the answer is almost always an episode from somewhere inside those 7 seasons. Season 5 gave us Scott Tenorman Must Die, which holds a 9.6 out of 10 on IMDb and is the highest rated episode in the show's entire history. That episode is the one where Eric Cartman, having been humiliated and scammed out of money by an older kid named Scott Tenorman, orchestrates an elaborate revenge that ends with Scott unknowingly eating chili, made from the flesh of his own murdered parents. That description sounds cartoonishly extreme, and it is. But what made the episode work, what earned it a 9.6 and made it one of the most talked about episodes in the history of adult animation, was the way the show committed to the premise with absolute seriousness. The reveal is not played for cheap shock. It is built across the entire episode through misdirection and escalation and genuine narrative craft. Cartman does not just do something horrible. He does something that redefines who he is. Before that episode, Cartman was a selfish, obnoxious kid. After it, he was something genuinely darker. The show had permanently changed a character by letting him do something irreversible, and it had the courage to never take it back. Season 10 gave us Make Love Not Warcraft, rated 9.5 on IMDb, and the winner of the Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program. The episode was made using machinima techniques filmed within the actual World of Warcraft game engine. It is a nearly perfect piece of satire about gaming culture, obsession, and the absurdity of virtual achievement. It works as comedy, it works as commentary, it works as a genuinely well-structured story with a beginning, middle, and end that all earn their moments. Season 9 produced Trapped in the Closet, the Scientology episode. That episode did something that almost nothing on American television had ever attempted. It explained in straightforward and detailed terms the actual beliefs of the Church of Scientology, complete with an on-screen disclaimer reading, "This is what Scientologists actually believe." The episode generated real consequences. Isaac Hayes, who had voiced the character of Chef since the show's first season, left the show in early 2006. Hayes was a Scientologist and publicly stated that his departure was due to what he called the show's intolerance and bigotry toward religious beliefs. Parker and Stone pointed out that Hayes had been perfectly comfortable with the show mocking every other religion for nearly a decade. The character of Chef was killed off in the Season 10 premiere, Return of Chef, using spliced recordings of Hayes' previous dialogue. It was brutal and funny and sad all at once. The Imagination Land trilogy from season 11 was a 3-part epic that sent the boys into a fantasy realm populated by every fictional character in human history. It was ambitious in a way that the show had rarely attempted before, and it won the Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program in the 1-hour category. It was later recut as a direct-to-video film with additional unseen footage. Margaritaville from season 13, which technically falls just outside the commonly cited Golden Age window but shares its DNA, won the Emmy in 2009. It was an extended satirical parable about the 2008 financial crisis that used the metaphor of the town of South Park treating the economy as a literal deity that had become angry and needed to be appeased through sacrifice. It was one of the sharpest pieces of economic commentary produced by any medium during the financial crisis. These episodes, and dozens of others from the same period, share a set of qualities that are worth identifying because they are the qualities that the later seasons would gradually lose. The first quality is fearlessness, not performative fearlessness, not the kind of edginess that exists primarily to generate controversy and attention, but genuine fearlessness born from the specific conditions I described earlier. The Scientology episode was made by 2 men who knew they might lose a cast member over it and made it anyway. The Muhammad episodes, 200 and 201 from season 14, were made by 2 men who received genuine death threats from an extremist organization called Revolution Muslim and finished the episodes anyway. Comedy Central ultimately censored significant portions of episode 201, bleeping out the final speeches entirely. Both 200 and 201, along with Super Best Friends from Season 5 and both parts of Cartoon Wars from Season 10, were pulled from all streaming platforms and remain unavailable to this day. 5 episodes of South Park that you cannot legally watch anywhere because the show pushed so hard against a specific boundary that the consequences were real and permanent. That is not a show playing at being dangerous. That is a show that was actually dangerous. And dangerous in that specific way requires the kind of creative fearlessness that only exists when the people making the show have already survived failure and are not primarily concerned with protecting a business empire. The second quality is the boys as moral center. In the Golden Age, Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny were the show's heart. The adults of South Park, from Randy Marsh to Mr. Garrison to the various celebrity targets of the week, were the satirical subjects. The boys existed in a world of childhood normalcy that contrasted with the insanity of the adult world around them. Their friendships, their rivalries, their ordinary kid problems, these were the grounding elements that made the satire land. You could laugh at the absurdity because you cared about the kids navigating it. Stan and Kyle's friendship was the emotional anchor of the show. They were best friends in the specific, uncomplicated way that 10-year-old boys are best friends. They disagreed sometimes, they annoyed each other sometimes, but the fundamental warmth between them was real, and it gave the show a center of gravity that kept even the most outrageous episodes tethered to something recognizable. When Stan delivered the moral of the episode, which happened frequently in those early years, it landed because the show had earned it through 20 minutes of genuine storytelling. Cartman was the show's greatest creation. In the Golden Age, he occupied a space that almost no other animated character had ever managed to hold. He was genuinely evil. Not cartoon evil, not misunderstood evil. Genuinely, specifically evil, in a way that the show treated with the seriousness it deserved. Scott Tenorman Must Die was the defining moment, but there were dozens of others. Cartman manipulating Butters, exploiting tragedy for personal gain, expressing views so toxic that they became a kind of satirical commentary on the very idea of a person who holds those views. The brilliance of the character was that the show never softened him. It never asked the audience to feel sorry for him or to understand where he was coming from. It simply presented him as a specific, recognizable type of human being, amplified to an absurd degree, and let the audience deal with the discomfort of finding him funny. Kenny, who died in nearly every episode during seasons 1 through 5 as a running gag, was killed off permanently in the season 5 episode Kenny Dies, which aired on December 5, 2001. The show treated his death with genuine emotion, which was itself a joke about the fact that they had been killing him casually every week for 5 years. He returned at the end of season 6, but the running death gag was largely retired. The show had recognized that the bit had run its course and made the choice to move beyond it. The third quality is the 6-day production cycle functioning at its peak. During the Golden Age, the rapid turnaround was not just a logistical fact about how the show was made. It was the engine of the show's relevance. South Park could respond to events in near real time. An election could happen on Tuesday and be satirized by the following Wednesday. A cultural moment could peak and be addressed before it faded from public attention. This made South Park feel alive in a way that no other animated show could match. You watched South Park on Wednesday night knowing that whatever you saw had been written days ago, not months ago. The show existed in the same present tense as its audience. The fourth quality, and this one is easy to overlook because it looks like the absence of something rather than the presence of something, is creative freedom through uncertainty. Parker and Stone during the Golden Age did not know how long the show would last. They did not have a billion-dollar contract guaranteeing seasons through 2030. They were making television under the constant awareness that the show could be canceled, or that the network could demand changes, or that the next controversial episode could be the one that crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. That uncertainty was not comfortable, but it was creatively productive in a way that security almost never is. When you do not know if you will be here next year, you do not hold anything back for next year. You use your best ideas now. You take your biggest swings now. You say the thing you have been wanting to say because there might not be a later opportunity to say it. That urgency, that creative desperation, is the invisible ingredient in every great Golden Age episode. It is the reason Scott Tenorman Must Die hits as hard as it does. It is the reason the Scientology episode exists at all. It is the reason the show was willing to animate the Prophet Muhammad and deal with death threats rather than play it safe. The people making the show were not protecting a brand. They were making something that mattered to them with the full knowledge that it might not last. And that knowledge made them brave in ways that success would eventually make very difficult to sustain. There is one more quality of the Golden Age that I want to name because it is the one that people struggle to articulate when they try to explain why the early seasons felt different. The Golden Age had a specific relationship with absurdity that the later seasons lost. In the Golden Age, the absurd elements of the show, the talking poop, the alien visitors, the zombie outbreaks, the sadistic woodland animals, these things existed in a world that also contained genuine emotion. An episode could start with Cartman being terrible, detour through a B-plot involving some completely insane supernatural event, and then end with a moment of actual feeling between Stan and Kyle that landed because the show had not forgotten that these were people first and cartoon characters second. The absurdity did not cancel out the emotion. The two things coexisted, each making the other more effective. The jokes were funnier because the feelings were real. The feelings hit harder because the jokes had disarmed the audience's defenses. In the later seasons, particularly the serialized ones, the balance shifted. The absurdity was still present, sometimes in ambitious and creative forms. But the emotional grounding that the boys provided, that specific quality of children experiencing the world honestly and directly, was diminished by the shift toward Randy-centered stories and season-long arcs. When the emotional center of the show moves from 10-year-old boys to a middle-aged man running a weed farm, the nature of the comedy changes fundamentally. Randy's emotions are adult emotions colored by self-interest and ego. The boys' emotions in the Golden Age were the unfiltered responses of children who had not yet learned to calculate or compromise. That unfiltered quality is what made the Golden Age feel warm even when it was being offensive. The show was honest because its protagonists were honest, and children are honest in a way that adults, even fictional ones, cannot be. The Peabody Award that South Park received in 2005 or 2006, given for distinguished and biting social commentary, was recognition of exactly this quality. The award was not given for animation quality or rating success. It was given for the show's willingness to say things that needed to be said in a way that nobody else was willing to say them. That willingness came directly from the conditions the show was operating under. Conditions that, as we are about to see, were on the verge of changing completely. If you are still with me, stay comfortable. The story is about to shift, because what happened next is the part that turned two guys from Colorado into the richest creators in the history of television. And it is also the part that began, slowly and quietly, to take away everything that had made the Golden Age possible. The financial transformation of South Park is one of the most remarkable stories in the history of the entertainment business. And it starts with a single sentence in a contract that nobody thought mattered. When Parker and Stone signed their first deal with Comedy Central in 1997, their lawyer included a clause that gave the creators a 50% share of any revenue generated outside of traditional television broadcasts. In 1997, that clause was essentially meaningless. There was no meaningful digital media landscape. There was no streaming, there was no YouTube. The idea that a television show would generate significant revenue outside of being broadcast on television was, at that point, almost science fiction. The clause was included as a precaution, a standard bit of legal protection that nobody expected to actually matter. For nearly a decade, it did not matter. Parker and Stone made their money from the show itself, from the Comedy Central broadcast fees, from the merchandise, from the DVD releases. They were well off by normal standards. They were not wealthy by Hollywood standards. South Park was a successful show, but the financial architecture of the deal was built for a world where television was the only game in town. Then the world changed. In 2007, YouTube exploded. Netflix launched its streaming platform. The entire landscape of how people consume media shifted underneath the television industry in the space of a few years. And suddenly, the clause that nobody had thought about became the most valuable sentence in Parker and Stone's entire contract. Their legal team reminded Comedy Central of the 1997 provision, and this time everyone understood exactly what it was worth. The renegotiated deal formalized their right to create a digital hub called South Park Studios, a website where fans could watch episodes for free supported by advertising revenue. More importantly, it secured their 50% ownership of all digital revenue, from ad-supported streams to subscription-based licensing deals. That one clause, inserted into a contract when Matt Stone was sleeping on dirty laundry and Trey Parker was drawing construction paper cartoons in a small apartment, would eventually make both of them billionaires. The universe has a sense of humor. The streaming wars turned South Park into one of the most fought-over properties in the entertainment business. Hulu paid approximately $192 million for streaming rights. HBO Max, which later became simply Max, paid $500 million for those same rights in a deal that made South Park the third most in-demand title on their entire platform, behind only Game of Thrones and Rick and Morty. Warner Bros. Discovery would eventually sue Paramount over those rights, claiming that Paramount had violated the exclusive terms of their deal by putting new South Park content on Paramount+. The lawsuit was messy, the streaming landscape was messy, and at the center of all of it were two guys from Colorado whose construction paper show had become a billion-dollar chess piece in a corporate war between media conglomerates. On August 5th, 2021, Bloomberg broke the news that Parker and Stone had signed a new deal with Viacom-CBS. The reported figure was $900 million over 6 years. $900 million. For context, that number made it one of the richest talent deals in the history of television. The deal called for 6 more seasons of South Park on Comedy Central, plus 14 original South Park streaming movies, exclusively for the Paramount Plus platform. Variety reported that the deal advanced Parker and Stone approximately $150 million per year to cover their fees and ongoing profit participation. Matt Stone gave his first in-depth interview about the deal to Bloomberg's Screen Time newsletter. When asked whether he feared that South Park might fall victim to cancel culture, Stone's response was a sentence that tells you everything you need to know about what had changed since those early years. He said no. Then he said, "As you can see from this deal, we have fuck you money now." That quote is honest. It is funny. It is perfectly in character for Matt Stone. And it also describes the exact opposite of the condition that had made the Golden Age possible. The Golden Age was made by two guys who did not have fuck you money. They had fuck us money. Nothing. Zero. The knowledge that the world could end their show at any moment and they would have to start over from nothing. Fuck you money means you cannot be touched. Fuck us money means you have nothing to protect. Those two conditions produce fundamentally different creative work. Then, in July 2025, the numbers got even larger. Parker and Stone signed a new deal with Paramount worth $1.5 billion. The agreement replaced the $900 million deal from 2021 and guaranteed at least $250 million per year. Under the new terms, they would produce approximately 10 new episodes per year, securing the show through at least 2029 or 2030. Forbes confirmed on July 25, 2025, that both Trey Parker and Matt Stone had officially become billionaires. Their estimated net worth was reported at $1.2 billion each. To appreciate the distance traveled, think about it this way. In 1995, Matt Stone was sleeping on dirty laundry. In 2025, he is worth $1.2 billion. The show that made this possible was created for approximately $250,000 per episode. The deal that now funds it guarantees $250 million per year. Those numbers describe a transformation so complete that the two endpoints barely seem to belong to the same story. But they do belong to the same story. And the tension between them is the tension at the heart of everything that happened to South Park after the Golden Age. While all of this was happening on the financial side, Parker and Stone were also building an empire outside of South Park. In 2003, they went to see the Broadway musical Avenue Q and met its co-creator Robert Lopez. The three of them discovered a shared fascination with Mormonism and Joseph Smith. They began working on a musical together. That musical, The Book of Mormon, premiered on Broadway at the Eugene O'Neill Theater in March 2011. It was nominated for 14 Tony Awards, just one shy of the record for any show. It won 9, including Best Musical. It won the Grammy Award for Best Musical Theater Album. The cast recording became the highest-charting Broadway cast album in over 4 decades. The Book of Mormon has since grossed over $800 million worldwide. It has been seen by more than 20 million audience members across over 12,000 performances in more than a dozen countries. As of late 2025, it is the 10th longest-running Broadway show in history, having played more than 5,000 performances. The New York Times called it the best musical of the century. Jon Stewart called it a crowning achievement, and so good it makes me angry. In 2004, they wrote, directed, and starred in Team America, World Police, a satirical action film performed entirely with marionettes in the style of the 1960s Thunderbird series. It was crude and funny and commercially modest, but it developed a cult following. Parker also voiced the villain Balthazar Bratt in Despicable Me 3 in 2017. They created a web series called Sassy Justice using deep fake technology. They announced plans for a production studio called Important Studios. They developed a comedy film project with Kendrick Lamar that Stone described as something they were working on every day. All of these ventures were running simultaneously alongside South Park. Parker was still writing every episode. He was still directing nearly every episode. He was still voicing Stan, Cartman, Randy, Mr. Garrison, Mr. Mackey, Jimmy, Timmy, PC Principal, Satan, and dozens of other characters. Stone was still voicing Kyle, Kenny, Butters, Gerald, Craig, Jimbo, Jesus, and dozens more. The show never stopped requiring their presence. But presence is not the same thing as the kind of total, desperate, singular focus that had defined the Golden Age. When South Park was all Parker and Stone had, every ounce of their creative energy went into South Park. When South Park became one piece of a billion-dollar empire that included Broadway musicals and film projects and production companies and streaming deals worth $1.5 billion, the show was still getting their time and their voices and their scripts. But the conditions around the show had fundamentally changed. The desperation was gone. The uncertainty was gone. The specific creative hunger that comes from knowing that this might be all you ever get to make, that was gone, and something else had arrived in its place. Something that is much harder to fight than cancellation or poverty or death threats from extremists. What had arrived was obligation. The obligation to produce 10 episodes a year for a contract worth $250 million annually. The obligation to maintain a franchise that supported hundreds of jobs and billions of dollars in corporate value. The obligation to keep being South Park, to keep delivering what the audience expected, to keep the machine running because the machine was now too large and too important and too profitable for anyone to seriously suggest turning it off. Parker and Stone were not trapped. They had more power and more creative freedom than almost any two people in the history of television. But freedom and obligation can coexist in strange and uncomfortable ways. You can be free to make whatever you want and still feel obligated to make what the machine requires. And when the machine requires 10 episodes a year and 14 streaming movies and a consistent brand presence on a streaming platform that is fighting for survival against Netflix and Disney+, What the machine requires is not the same thing as what a 27-year-old sleeping on dirty laundry would have made if left to his own devices. If you are starting to fade, that is okay. We are going to keep going. And the story is about to get more specific and more personal. Because the next part is about the moment when Parker and Stone came closer than they have ever publicly admitted to walking away from the show entirely. On June 8, 2011, South Park aired the 7th episode of its 15th season. It was called You're Getting Old. And what it did to the show, to the audience, and to the conversation about what South Park even was anymore, was something that no amount of crude humor or celebrity mockery had ever managed. It scared people. Not because of what was on screen, but because of what it seemed to be saying about the people who made it. The episode was written by Trey Parker. The premise was deceptively simple. Stan Marsh turns 10 years old. And on his birthday, something changes. He starts seeing and hearing everything around him as literal excrement. Music that his friends enjoy sounds like feces to him. Movies that everyone else finds entertaining look like feces to him. His favorite activities, the things that used to give him pleasure, they all look and sound like the same thing. Everything has become, in Stan's words, just kind of shitty. If that sounds like a depression metaphor, that is because it is a depression metaphor. Stan is not experiencing a physical illness. He is experiencing what happens when you have done the same thing for long enough that the thing you used to love stops feeling like anything at all. And the episode does not resolve it. That is the part that genuinely frightened people. Stan's friendship with Kyle crumbles. Kyle cannot stand being around Stan's negativity, and Stan cannot explain what is happening to him in a way that Kyle can understand. They separate. The gap between them, which had been the emotional center of the show for 14 years, opens up, and the episode does not close it. Meanwhile, Randy and Sharon Marsh have a conversation that is played completely straight, with no jokes and no cutaways. Sharon tells Randy that she has been unhappy for a long time. She says the words that fans and critics would spend years analyzing. She says that the same shit just keeps happening over and over, and then in a week, it just all resets. That line, read it again. The same shit just keeps happening over and over, and then in a week, it just all resets. That is not Sharon Marsh talking about her marriage. That is the show talking about itself. That is the creators telling their audience through the mouth of a fictional character that they know what the format does. They know that the show resets every week. They know that nothing their characters experience has permanent consequences. They know that the same patterns repeat endlessly, and they are tired of it. The episode ends with a montage set to Fleetwood Mac's Landslide. The song was cleared for use literally the night before the episode aired. Parker later said they had backup songs ready in case the clearance did not come through, but none of them fit as well as Landslide. In the montage, Randy and Sharon separate. They sell the house. Stan, Sharon, and his sister Shelley move into a new apartment. Stan sits alone. Kyle and Cartman share a smile while playing video games together, an activity that Stan and Kyle once shared. Stan's friendships are gone. His family is broken. His cynicism shows no signs of ending. The episode fades out with no resolution. It was the final episode of the spring run. The fall episodes were not scheduled to air for 4 months, and in those 4 months, the internet came apart. Fans, critics, and entertainment journalists treated the episode as a potential farewell. Comedy Central's own press release had been unusually ominous, stating that after Stan celebrates his 10th birthday, he begins to see everything differently, and that the very fabric of South Park begins to unravel. The tone of the episode, combined with what people already knew about Parker and Stone's state of mind, created a genuine belief that the show might be over, and what people knew about Parker and Stone's state of mind was significant. In a March 2011 profile in The Hollywood Reporter, published just a few months before You're Getting Old aired, Parker and Stone had spoken about dreading the return to South Park production. Parker said, in reference to making the show, "I don't know how we're going to do it." This was the same period when The Book of Mormon was opening on Broadway to massive acclaim and 14 Tony nominations. Parker and Stone had just created one of the most celebrated musicals in decades. They were in their early 40s. They had been making South Park for 14 years, and the idea of going back to the grinding 6-day production cycle of writing another 10 episodes about the boys of South Park, Colorado, felt, by their own admission, like something they were not sure they could face. On the episode's DVD commentary, Parker and Stone confirmed what many had suspected. They said they had created Stan's existential crisis as a direct parallel with their own real-life aging. At the time of broadcast, Stone had just turned 40 and Parker was 41. They were no longer the energetic, provocative 20-somethings who had stormed Comedy Central with a construction paper cartoon. They were middle-aged men with families, with wealth, with a Broadway hit and a media empire who had spent their entire professional lives doing the same thing. And the same thing, after 14 years, had started to look and sound and feel, to borrow the episode's own metaphor, kind of shitty. Parker admitted in the commentary that they considered keeping the changes permanent. They talked about letting Randy and Sharon stay separated for the rest of season 15. They talked about exploring different dynamics across the town. They talked about fundamentally shifting the direction of the show in a way that honored the emotional honesty of what You're Getting Old had expressed. But every plan they came up with involved more drama than comedy. They could not figure out how to keep the show feeling like South Park while also respecting the genuine sadness and exhaustion that the episode had put on screen. The show's identity was built on irreverent, fast-paced satire. What You're Getting Old was expressing was something slower and heavier and more personal than the format could comfortably hold. Vernon Chapman, a writing consultant on the show who also voices the recurring character Towley, offered a suggestion that became the solution. He proposed that resetting the status quo could itself be played as a tragically dark joke about the show's own structure. The idea was that the audience would watch the reset happen and understand that the reset was the point. That going back to normal after something genuinely painful is not a happy ending. It is its own kind of tragedy. The fall premiere, Asperger's, did exactly that. Stan wakes up depressed. He goes through the motions of a South Park episode. He discovers that drinking alcohol makes the world look normal again. By the end of the episode, Randy and Sharon are back together. The boys are friends again. Everything is reset. And the final shot is Stan taking a swig from a hidden flask, suggesting that the only way he can function in the world the show has created is by numbing himself to it. That is one of the darkest endings in the history of American animated television. And the fact that it aired and then the next episode was a regular South Park episode where everything was fine again is the joke. It is the show saying, yes, this is what we do. We reset. We always reset. And the reset is the tragedy. Parker said in a 2015 interview with IGN's podcast Unlocked that he did not think the show would end with any kind of grand finale. He said, I think it is going to end with a fizzle, for sure. I think it is just going to end with some dud, and we are going to go, fuck this man, and walk away. Stone added that they had been waiting to get canceled for 18 years. He said, we always thought, all right, they are going to just cancel us for sure. We have been waiting to get canceled for 18 fucking years. In a 2019 interview with The Hollywood Reporter following a 3-season renewal, Stone said something even more specific. He said, I am 48. Trey turns 50 this year, so I will say that I don't think we will be doing the show when we are 60. Parker turns 60 in 2029. The current deal with Paramount guarantees the show through at least 2029 or 2030. Stone said he did not think they would be making the show at 60. The contract says they will be making it until at least that age. Those two facts sit next to each other quietly, and neither one has blinked yet. There is something deeply human about this contradiction. The part of you that knows you are tired and the part of you that cannot stop are both real. They do not cancel each other out. They coexist uncomfortably, the way exhaustion and obligation coexist in any long career, in any marriage that has lasted decades, in any commitment that started with passion and has been sustained by something more complicated and less romantic. Parker and Stone are not machines. They are two men in their mid-50s who have been doing the same job since their mid-20s. They have watched the world change around them, watched the industry transform, watched the audience evolve, watched their own show become something they did not entirely recognize, and they have kept showing up. That persistence is either admirable or tragic or both, depending on what you think the purpose of a creative life is. If the purpose is to make the best possible work, then persistence past the point of peak quality is a kind of diminishment. If the purpose is to show up and do the work and honor the thing you have built, then persistence is its own form of integrity. I think it is both, I think Parker and Stone think it is both, and I think the show itself, in its best moments of self-awareness, thinks it is both too. Of course, as Parker pointed out in the same interview, they had also said they would not continue working on the show in their 40s, and then they made it through their entire 40s. The pattern is consistent. They talk about stopping, they feel the exhaustion, they express it publicly and even embed it in the text of the show itself. And then they sign another deal. 900 million, 1.5 billion. The numbers get larger, the obligations extend further into the future, and the show keeps going. Whether this is a story about dedication or a story about golden handcuffs depends on where you are sitting. From the outside, 2 billionaire creators continuing to make a beloved show sounds like a good problem to have. From the inside, 2 men who have publicly said they are tired, who embedded their exhaustion into one of the most emotionally raw episodes the show has ever produced, continuing to work because the contract requires it and the money justifies it, looks like something more complicated. What You're Getting Old proved beyond any doubt is that Parker and Stone understood exactly what was happening to them and to their show. They saw it. They felt it. They said it out loud, through Stan, through Sharon, through the landslide montage that ended the episode with a kind of sadness that South Park had never attempted before. They knew the golden age was over. They knew the conditions had changed. They knew the machine was running on a different fuel than the one it had started with. And they kept going because the machine was worth $900 million and then $1.5 billion. And because people still loved the show. And because what else were they going to do? And because stopping something you have done for your entire adult life is harder than it sounds even when you have all the money in the world. Especially when you have all the money in the world. If You're Getting Old was the moment the show was most honest about what it was feeling. Then what happened starting in season 18 was the moment the show tried to do something about it. Parker and Stone, faced with a creeping sense that the episodic format had become a trap, made a decision that would fundamentally alter the identity of South Park for the next several years. They decided to tell longer stories. They decided to serialize. For the first 17 seasons of South Park, the show was primarily episodic. Each episode was a self-contained story. Something happened in the town. The boys dealt with it. There were consequences. Then the next week, everything reset and a new story began. There were exceptions, multi-part episodes like Imagination Land and Cartoon Wars, and the 200/201 arc, but these were special events rather than the default mode. The episodic structure was central to what made South Park work. It was what allowed the 6-day production cycle to function. When you are making a new, self-contained story every week, you can respond to whatever happened in the news 5 days ago. Each episode is its own sprint, its own creative challenge, its own opportunity to say something new and specific about the world as it exists right now. Beginning with season 18 in 2014, the show began transitioning to a hybrid format. Episodes were no longer completely standalone. Storylines carried over from one episode to the next. Characters remembered what had happened in previous weeks. The town of South Park had a continuity that it had never previously sustained. This shift happened gradually at first, with loose threads connecting episodes within a season, but it accelerated quickly. Season 19 introduced PC Principal, who was originally conceived as a one-off antagonist, but was promoted to a permanent main cast member by the end of the season. That season built a continuous arc around political correctness, gentrification, and the transformation of South Park into a more progressive town. The serialization was tighter than anything the show had attempted before. Each episode contributed to a larger story. By the season finale, the accumulated plot lines converged in a way that rewarded viewers who had watched every episode and confused viewers who had missed one. Then came season 20, and season 20 is where the experiment reached its most extreme point and, in the eyes of many fans and critics, broke the show. Season 20 aired in the fall of 2016. The real-world context matters enormously. The 2016 presidential election was in full swing. Donald Trump was running against Hillary Clinton. The discourse was loud, polarized, and consuming all available oxygen. Parker and Stone decided to make the entire season a continuous 10-episode arc built around the election. Mr. Garrison, the show's longtime teacher character, became a stand-in for Trump. The season also featured a storyline about internet trolling through a character called Skank Hunt 42, who turned out to be Kyle's father, Gerald. The problem was structural. South Park had always been at its best when it could pivot. When something happened in the world on a Thursday, the show could address it by Wednesday. But when you are locked into a season-long arc about the 2016 election, you cannot pivot. You are committed to a story that was designed months earlier, and if the world changes in ways you did not predict, you're stuck. And the world in 2016 changed in ways that nobody predicted. Parker and Stone have said in interviews that they, like much of the media and entertainment industry, had expected Hillary Clinton to win the election. When Trump won on November 8th, the show was mid-season and mid-arc. They had to scramble to rewrite the following week's episode to account for an outcome that their season-long storyline had not been designed to accommodate. The episode that aired the week after the election, titled "Oh Geez," had to be substantially reworked in real time. The result was a season that felt constrained in a way South Park had never felt before. Rotten Tomatoes recorded a critic score of 73% for season 20. That might sound reasonable for most shows, but for South Park, which had earned perfect 100% scores for seasons 5, 10, 11, 12, and 16, it represented a notable drop. Fan reception was mixed at best. The continuous serialization made individual episodes harder to appreciate on their own. The election satire, which had been timely when the season was being planned, felt dated almost immediately after the election ended. The show that had always lived in the present tense was, for the first time, trapped in a story about the recent past. Season 21 was worse. It holds the lowest Rotten Tomatoes critics score in the show's entire history at 54%. The show was still dealing with the aftermath of the serialization experiment, still trying to figure out how much continuity to maintain and how much to abandon. The identity crisis was visible on screen. Episodes felt caught between the old episodic format and the new serialized ambition, not quite committing to either. What the serialization experiment cost South Park was the very thing that had made it unique. No other animated show could make an episode in 6 days. That was South Park's superpower. It was the reason the show felt relevant, urgent, alive. Serialization neutralized that advantage. When you're telling a 10-episode story, the events of last Thursday do not matter nearly as much as the narrative arc you established in episode 1. The show had traded its greatest strength for a storytelling structure that every other show on television was already using. It had voluntarily given up the one thing that nobody else could do. The serialization also brought a second, more subtle problem. It changed the show's relationship with its audience. In the episodic era, you could watch any episode of South Park and understand it. You could tune in on a random Wednesday night and get a complete, self-contained story. That accessibility was part of the show's broad appeal. Once serialization took hold, the barrier to entry rose. If you missed episode 3, episode 4 did not make sense. Casual viewers, the ones who dipped in and out of the show depending on what else was on that week, began falling away. The show was training its audience to either commit to the full season or not bother. And then there was the Randy Marsh problem. Randy, Stan's father, had always been one of the show's funniest characters. In the early seasons, he was a background presence, a suburban dad who occasionally got caught up in the town's latest absurdity. His drunk, enthusiastic buffoonery was a reliable source of comedy. Over time, the writers discovered that Randy was fun to write, that his combination of adult ego and childlike impulsiveness produced consistently funny material. So they gave him more screen time, and more, and more. By season 22, which introduced the Tegrity Farm storyline, Randy had essentially become the show's main character. The premise was that Randy moved the family to a marijuana farm and became a weed entrepreneur. The Tegrity Farms arc would dominate multiple seasons. Randy's shenanigans consumed enormous amounts of screen time, and the boys, Stan and Kyle and Cartman and Kenny, the 4 characters around whom the entire show had been built, were pushed to the margins of their own series. This shift was not subtle. Season 23 has been described by critics as the season where Randy took the role of series' main character. The show was no longer primarily about 4 kids in an elementary school. It was about a middle-aged man running a marijuana business. The satire was still present, the jokes were still there, but the fundamental identity of the show had changed. The grounding element of the golden age, the ordinary childhood friendship between Stan and Kyle that gave the satire its emotional center, was no longer at the core of what the show was about. Fans noticed. The conversation in fan communities shifted. Discussions about whether the show was still good became discussions about whether the show was still South Park. The boys had not been written off the show, they were still present, but they had been demoted from protagonists to supporting characters in a show that now revolved around Stan's dad getting into weed-related misadventures. That is a fundamentally different show from the one that produced Scott Tenorman Must Die and Make Love Not Warcraft. The COVID era made everything more complicated. Season 24, which would have been a standard season, was disrupted by the pandemic. The traditional format was abandoned entirely. The season consisted of just 2 long-form specials, the Pandemic Special in September 2020 and the South Park Vaccination Special in March 2021. That was it, 2 episodes for an entire season. Then, later in 2021, as part of the new $900 million deal, Parker and Stone produced separate long-form Paramount Plus specials. Post-COVID arrived in November 2021 and the return of COVID in December 2021. These were 45-minute films that jumped forward in time and showed the boys as adults dealing with the long-term consequences of the pandemic. They were ambitious and sometimes genuinely moving. The post-COVID films, in particular, attempted something the show had never done before, showing the boys as middle-aged men and exploring what their lives had become. They were well received by many fans and critics, but they were not South Park in the way the Golden Age audience understood it. They were films. They were event content for a streaming platform that needed exclusive programming to justify subscriptions. They were part of the $900 million deal. They were obligations as much as they were creative expressions. The format also contracted significantly. Early seasons had produced 17 or 18 episodes. By seasons 25 and 26, the episode count had dropped to 6 per season. Seasons 27 and 28 produced just 5 episodes each, airing on a bi-weekly schedule. For a show whose identity was built on rapid, prolific output, producing 5 episodes every few months is a different thing entirely. The 6-day miracle still exists. Parker still writes each episode in a week. But the total volume of work has shrunk to a fraction of what it was during the Golden Age. The serialization experiment was not a failure in the simple sense. It produced interesting television. It pushed the show in directions it had never gone. Some of the serialized arcs, particularly in seasons 18 and 19, were among the most ambitious storytelling the show had attempted. But it also demonstrated, clearly and painfully, that what made South Park great was not just the talent of its creators or the sharpness of its writing. What made South Park great was a specific relationship between the show and the present moment. A relationship built on speed and immediacy and the ability to respond to the world in near real time. Serialization damaged that relationship. It traded South Park's unique identity for a more conventional storytelling mode that the show was not built to sustain. Parker and Stone seemed to recognize this. After season 20, they dialed back the strict serialization. Later seasons maintained loose character arcs within an episodic framework, but the damage to the show's identity had already been done. The audience had experienced what South Park looked like when it was trying to be something other than what it was, and many of them had decided they preferred the original. There is a term that television fans use to describe what happens when a character loses the qualities that made them interesting and gets reduced to a single trait played louder and louder until it is all that remains. The term is Flanderization. It comes from The Simpsons. Ned Flanders, the Simpsons neighbor in Springfield, began the show as a genuinely well-drawn character. He was a deeply religious man who was also patient, warm, and surprisingly human in his frustrations. Over many seasons, everything about Ned, except his religiousness, was gradually stripped away until he existed purely as a walking collection of church jokes. The human being disappeared, the label stayed. South Park did this to nearly every character it had, and because South Park's characters were always drawn in broader strokes than the characters on a show like The Simpsons, the Flanderization was more visible, more aggressive, and in some cases more damaging to the show's ability to tell the kinds of stories it had been telling during the Golden Age. Eric Cartman is the clearest case and also the most complicated. During the Golden Age, Cartman was television's greatest villain. That is not an exaggeration. He was a child who operated with the moral reasoning of a dictator and the emotional intelligence of a snake, wrapped in the body of an overweight 10-year-old wearing a red jacket. What made Cartman work was the show's absolute commitment to treating his villainy as real. When he fed Scott Tenorman his own parents in a bowl of chili, the show did not soften it with a reset or a lesson or a moment of remorse. It let the act stand. It let Cartman be exactly what he was. And in doing so, it created a character who was simultaneously one of the funniest and most disturbing figures in the history of American comedy. In the post-Golden Age seasons, the show struggled with what to do with Cartman. The problem was that his villainy had been escalated to such an extreme point that it was difficult to go further without losing the audience entirely, and equally difficult to dial it back without neutering the character. The show's solution was to oscillate. In some seasons, Cartman was still a genuine menace. In others, he was given redemption arcs that softened him in ways that undercut his essential nature. The Heidi-Turner relationship in seasons 20 and 21 was a particularly clear example. Cartman entered a relationship with a girl named Heidi that the show initially played for genuine emotional investment. For a few episodes, it seemed like the show was asking whether Cartman could be a real person with real feelings rather than a monster. Then the arc devolved into Cartman emotionally abusing Heidi, which was tonally uncomfortable in a way that the show's earlier Cartman as villain moments had not been. The difference was specificity. In the Golden Age, Cartman's evil was theatrical. It was grandiose and absurd, and so over the top that it functioned as satire. In the Heidi arc, his cruelty was domestic and realistic, which made it harder to process as comedy. The show was using a character designed for theatrical villainy to explore something intimate, and the gears did not quite mesh. Season 28, which aired in late 2025, introduced a Christian Cartman arc. Cartman's faith was played as potentially sincere, which created yet another layer of ambiguity around a character whose entire identity had been built on the certainty that he was genuinely, irredeemably terrible. The show kept trying to find new things for Cartman to be, and each new version diluted the clarity of the original. Compare this to the Golden Age, when Cartman simply was what he was. The writers did not worry about his growth or his arc or his redemption potential. They wrote him as a specific, committed, fully realized villain, and the specificity of that commitment was what made him one of the greatest characters in the medium. When you start asking whether the villain can be redeemed, you have already lost the thing that made the villain interesting. Randy Marsh's trajectory is the most structurally damaging case of Flanderization in the show's history, because it did not just change a character, it changed the show's center of gravity. In the early seasons, Randy was a background character. He was Stan's dad. He appeared when the plot required a parent to react to whatever insanity was happening in the town. He was funny in those moments because he was an ordinary suburban dad thrown into extraordinary situations, and his reactions were recognizably human. He panicked the way a real person would panic. He got drunk and said things he should not say the way a real person would. His enthusiasm for whatever fad or crisis was sweeping the town was funny because it was grounded in a recognizable kind of middle-aged male boredom. As the seasons progressed, the writers discovered that Randy's buffoonery was easy to write and reliably funny, so they gave him more screen time. By the mid-seasons, Randy had evolved from background dad to a major supporting character. By season 22, with the introduction of Tegrity Farms, he had become the protagonist. The boys, the four kids who had been the emotional and comedic center of the show since 1997, were now supporting characters in the Randy Marsh show. This shift happened because of something specific about long-running comedies. When a show has been on for 15 or 20 seasons, the characters that are easiest to write tend to get the most screen time. Randy was easy to write because his single defining quality, enthusiastic buffoonery, could be applied to any situation. Need a weed storyline? Randy can do that. Need an election satire? Randy can do that. Need someone to overreact to a cultural moment? Randy was the obvious choice every time. The versatility of his single trait made him a useful tool for the writers. The problem was that usefulness is not the same thing as narrative necessity. The Golden Age did not need Randy at the center because the boys were at the center, and the boys worked as the show's foundation because they provided something Randy could not. They provided innocence. They provided the specific kind of moral clarity that only children possess. The ability to look at the insanity of the adult world and say clearly and simply that it is insane. When Randy became the protagonist, that moral center was lost. Randy is an adult. His reactions to the world are adult reactions, filtered through ego and self-interest, and the specific kinds of compromises that adults make. He cannot see the world the way Stan and Kyle see it, because he is part of the world they were observing from the outside. Putting Randy at the center of the show transformed South Park from a show about children making sense of an insane world into a show about an insane adult making the world worse. Those are two fundamentally different kinds of comedy, and the second one, while funny, lacks the warmth and the insight and the specific grounding quality that made the first one feel like it mattered. Kenny McCormick is a case of Flanderization through absence. During the first 5 seasons, Kenny's recurring death was one of the show's most iconic running gags. Every episode, Kenny would die in some absurd and violent way. The other characters would react briefly, and by the next episode, he would be back with no explanation. The gag was simple, repetitive, and funny in the way that simple, repetitive things are funny when they are committed to fully. It was a structural joke about the nature of episodic television, a commentary on the fact that nothing in a sitcom has permanent consequences. Then, in the season 5 episode Kenny Dies, which aired on December 5, 2001, the show killed Kenny for real. He was diagnosed with a terminal illness and died in a hospital bed. The episode played his death with genuine emotion, which itself was a joke about the absurdity of suddenly taking seriously something the show had been treating as a punchline for 5 years. Kenny was absent for most of season 6, replaced as the 4th boy first by Butters and then briefly by Tweak. He returned at the end of the season, and the recurring death gag was largely retired. After his return, Kenny never quite found a clear role. The death gag had been his defining feature, and without it, he faded into the background. His superhero alter ego, Mysterion, introduced in season 13, was an interesting development. The Coon and Friends trilogy explored the idea that Kenny could not actually die, that he was cursed with immortality, and that nobody remembered his deaths, which added a genuinely interesting layer of melancholy to what had been a simple sight gag. But this idea was never fully developed. It surfaced in a few episodes and then receded. Kenny remained present in the show, still one of the 4 boys, still appearing in most episodes, but without the death gag or a consistent alternative function, he became the least defined member of the ensemble. Stan and Kyle, the emotional core of the Golden Age, underwent a quieter form of Flanderization that was no less damaging. In the Golden Age, their friendship was specific. It had texture. Stan was the everyman, the kid who reacted to the world with a kind of bewildered decency. Kyle was the moral voice, the kid who took things seriously and felt genuine outrage when things were unjust. Their dynamic worked because both characters had clearly defined internal lives. When Stan learned something, you could see him process it. When Kyle got angry, you understood where the anger came from. In the later seasons, particularly during the serialized arcs, Stan and Kyle became less distinct. Stan functioned increasingly as a generic straight man. Kyle functioned increasingly as a generic voice of reason. Their specific qualities, the texture of their friendship, the particular ways they responded to the world, these were smoothed away by the demands of season-long plotting. When you were telling a 10-episode story about internet trolling and the 2016 election, you do not have room for the small, specific character moments that define the Golden Age. The boys become tools for advancing the plot rather than people the audience is spending time with. The one genuine bright spot in the character evolution of the later seasons is Butters Stotch. Butters started as an unnamed background character in the pilot. He was gradually developed from season 3 onward. When Kenny was absent for most of season 6, Butters stepped in as his replacement, and the show discovered that this naive, optimistic, hopelessly guileless kid was one of the funniest things in the ensemble. Butters was eventually promoted to de facto 5th main character. His trajectory is the reverse of everyone else's. He became more interesting as the show went on, not less. His innocence functioned as a perfect counterpoint to Cartman's malice. His relationship with his parents, who alternated between neglectful indifference and bizarre overreaction, became one of the show's most reliable running threads. But Butters is one character in an ensemble of dozens, and the overall direction of the cast was consistent. The characters who had been specific and human during the Golden Age became broader and simpler over time. Their most recognizable traits expanded until those traits were all there was. Cartman's villainy oscillated between commitment and retreat. Randy's buffoonery consumed the show. Kenny lost his defining feature and never found a new one. Stan and Kyle lost their specificity. This is what long-running success does to characters. It is not deliberate. Nobody in the writer's room decides, let us make these people less interesting. It happens through 1,000 small decisions, each one reasonable on its own. Give Randy one more scene because he is funny. Soften Cartman because the audience needs a break. Give Stan less to do because the plot requires focus elsewhere. Each decision makes sense in isolation. The cumulative effect is the slow erosion of everything that made the audience care about these people in the first place. There is another dimension to this character drift that deserves attention because it connects to something specific about the way long-running shows interact with their audiences. When a show has been on the air for 10 or 15 or 20 years, the audience develops a relationship with the characters that is separate from the characters themselves. Fans do not just watch Cartman, they watch their memory of Cartman. They watch the Cartman who fed Scott Tenorman his parents. They watch the Cartman who dressed up as Hitler. They watch every version of Cartman simultaneously, and they measure the current version against every version that came before. That accumulated weight of expectation is something the writers have to navigate in every single episode, and it is one of the reasons that Golden Age episodes feel lighter and more alive than later ones. In the Golden Age, there was less weight. The characters had less history. The writers could take them in genuinely surprising directions because the audience did not yet know where those directions led. By season 20 or 25, the characters carried decades of accumulated behavior, and the writers had to account for all of it every time they sat down to write a scene. This accumulated weight also affects the satire. In the Golden Age, South Park's satirical targets were external. The show attacked Scientology, celebrity culture, political hypocrisy, cultural fads. The boys were observers. They watched the adults of South Park go insane over whatever issue was dominating the news that week, and their childish perspective provided the clarity that the adults lacked. That structure worked because the boys were relatively blank slates. They had not yet been weighed down by years of accumulated storylines and character arcs. They could look at the world fresh every week. In the later seasons, particularly the serialized ones, the satirical structure inverted. The show was no longer observing the world from the outside. It was processing the world through the accumulated history of its own characters. Season 20's election satire was filtered through Mr. Garrison's character arc, through Cartman's relationship with Heidi, through Gerald's trolling storyline. The satire was no longer direct. It was mediated through layers of existing character dynamics that sometimes enriched the commentary and sometimes smothered it. The Member Berries subplot from that same season is a useful example. The idea that American culture was drowning in nostalgia for a simpler past was sharp and timely. The execution, which involved sentient, anthropomorphic berries that whispered nostalgic catchphrases, was imaginative and weird in the best South Park tradition. But the subplot had to share space with 3 or 4 other serialized storylines, and the result was that no single thread got the attention it deserved. In an episodic format, the Member Berries concept would have been the entire episode. It would have been explored fully, pushed to its logical conclusion, and resolved in 22 minutes. In the serialized format, it was one ingredient in a soup that had too many things simmering at once. The show's guest star philosophy also changed in revealing ways. In the early seasons, South Park handled celebrity appearances with a specific subversive glee. George Clooney was invited to guest star and given the role of Stan's dog, limited to barking. Jay Leno provided meows for Cartman's cat. Henry Winkler grunted as a monster. Jerry Seinfeld was offered the role of Turkey Number 4 and declined when he was told the role would not be expanded. These casting choices were not just funny, they were a statement about what kind of show South Park was. A show that did not need celebrities and would not be impressed by them. A show that would give the biggest star in Hollywood the role of a dog that could only bark. And that was the joke, and the celebrity could either participate in the joke or stay home. That attitude, the total refusal to be impressed by fame or power or institutional authority, is another thing that comes naturally when you have nothing and becomes harder to maintain when you have everything. When your show is worth $1.5 billion, your relationship with power and fame and institutional authority is different by definition because you are now part of the institution. You are the power structure. You are the fame. The outsider energy that made those early celebrity cameos so funny is harder to access when you are worth more than most of the celebrities you are mocking. None of this means that the later seasons of South Park are worthless, or that the show should have ended after season 11. There are genuinely excellent episodes scattered throughout the later years. The Black Friday trilogy in season 17, which parodied Game of Thrones while simultaneously satirizing consumer culture, was as sharp as anything in the Golden Age. Grounded Vindaloop from season 18, which played with virtual reality concepts, was inventive and funny. The End of Obesity, a 2024 Paramount Plus special about weight loss drugs, was praised as some of the show's best recent work. But these episodes exist as highlights in a landscape that is more uneven than the Golden Age. In the Golden Age, the highlights were the norm. Episode after episode delivered at a level that the later seasons can only match intermittently. The difference is not between good and bad. It is between consistent excellence and occasional excellence interrupted by competent professionalism. And that difference, which sounds small when you describe it in words, is enormous when you feel it as a viewer. If you are drifting, that is fine. Let the words carry you. We are getting close to the heart of the thing now. Everything in this video has been building toward a single argument, and I want to make that argument now as clearly and as honestly as I can. South Park's Golden Age was made by two men who had nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean it in the most literal sense available. Matt Stone was sleeping on a pile of dirty laundry in a Los Angeles apartment because he could not afford a mattress. Trey Parker was drawing construction paper cutouts in a cramped workspace because that was the animation they could afford. The pilot episode cost about as much as a nice car. The weekly episodes cost about $250,000 each, which sounds like a lot until you realize that a standard animated television show at that time cost several times that amount. They were making do with what they had, and what they had was talent, speed, profanity, and the absolute certainty that nobody was going to save them if the show failed. That certainty is the thing. That is the ingredient that made the Golden Age golden. Not the talent, although the talent was genuine and enormous. Not the speed, although the 6-day production cycle was a creative superweapon. Not the fearlessness, although the willingness to take on Scientology and radical Islam and the Catholic Church and the entire American political spectrum was genuinely remarkable. The ingredient was the absence of a safety net. The knowledge felt in the bones rather than understood intellectually that this might not work, that the show might get canceled, that the network might pull the plug, that tomorrow might look very different from today. That knowledge changes how you create. It changes what risks you are willing to take. It changes how much of yourself you put into the work. When you might not be here next year, you do not save your best ideas for next year. You use them now. You put everything on the table because the table might be gone tomorrow. That is why Scott Tenorman Must Die exists. That is why the Scientology episode exists. That is why the Muhammad episodes exist, the ones that generated actual death threats from actual extremists, and resulted in 5 episodes being pulled from all streaming platforms permanently. Those episodes were made by people who were not calculating the risk to a billion-dollar brand because there was no billion-dollar brand. There was just a show and 2 guys who wanted the show to be as good and as honest and as brave as it could possibly be, because they did not know how long they would get to make it. Now those same 2 guys are worth $1.2 billion each. Their show is guaranteed through at least 2029 or 2030 by a contract worth $1.5 billion. Their production company, Park County, is entirely self-owned and generates at least $250 million per year in guaranteed revenue. Their Broadway musical has grossed over $800 million. They have won 5 Emmy Awards, a Peabody Award, 9 Tony Awards, a Grammy, and an Oscar nomination. They are, by any measure, among the most successful creative people in the history of American entertainment. And they cannot be canceled. That last fact is the one that matters most. South Park cannot be canceled. It is too valuable. It is too central to Paramount's streaming strategy. It is too deeply embedded in the financial architecture of a media conglomerate that is spending billions of dollars to compete with Netflix and Disney+. The show is not on the air because it is the best show on television. It is on the air because it is the most valuable show in the portfolio of a corporation that needs it to justify subscription revenue. Those are different reasons, and they produce different kinds of television. When you cannot be canceled, the creative equation changes in ways that are subtle but pervasive. The fear of failure, which is an uncomfortable emotion but also an extraordinarily productive one, is replaced by the certainty of continuation. And certainty of continuation does not produce Scott Tenorman Must Die. It does not produce Trapped in the Closet. It does not produce the kind of television that makes an audience sit up straight and think, I cannot believe they just did that, because the they just did that quality comes from the possibility that doing it might cost you everything. When doing it costs you nothing, when the contract guarantees your existence regardless of what you do or do not do, the stakes are gone. And comedy without stakes is just noise. I want to be very careful here because I do not want to suggest that Parker and Stone have stopped caring or stopped trying. The evidence says the opposite. Parker still writes virtually every episode himself. He still directs virtually every one. The 6-day production cycle is still in place. They still push boundaries. Season 27 in 2025 featured a highly serialized narrative centered on a caricature of Donald Trump depicted in an abusive romantic relationship with Satan. When Paramount's merger with Skydance Media delayed the season 27 premiere, Parker and Stone publicly called the merger a shit show on social media. That is not the behavior of people who have stopped caring, but caring and hunger are different things. You can care deeply about something and still lack the specific desperation that comes from not knowing if you will be allowed to keep doing it. Parker and Stone care about South Park. They have always cared about South Park. What they no longer have is the structural uncertainty that turned caring into the kind of white-hot creative intensity that produced the Golden Age. The caring is still there, the hunger is gone, and the work, while still competent and sometimes brilliant, reflects the difference. Matt Stone's quote about the $900 million deal captures this with a kind of accidental poetry. He said, "We have fuck you money now." And he was right. Fuck you money means that nobody can tell you what to do. It means that no executive, no advertiser, no special interest group, no angry mob on the internet can force you to change your show or soften your message or apologize for something you believe in. That is a genuinely valuable thing to have. It is, in many ways, the dream of every creative person. The freedom to do whatever you want without fear of consequences. But fuck you money is the opposite of the condition that produced the Golden Age. The Golden Age was made by people who had what you might call fuck us money, which is to say, nothing, no money at all. The total absence of financial security. The knowledge that the world could end their careers at any moment and they would be back to sleeping on dirty laundry and eating cheap food in a small apartment. Fuck you money says I do not need to care what anyone thinks. Fuck us money says I have nothing to lose, so I might as well make exactly the thing I want to make, as honestly and as bravely as I can, because this might be my only shot. The first produces confidence, the second produces desperation. And desperation in creative work is almost always more productive than confidence. Confidence coasts, desperation sprints. Confidence plays the percentages. Desperation swings for the fences because the alternative is striking out anyway. The season 27 experience illustrates this dynamic in miniature. The premiere was delayed by Paramount's corporate merger. Parker and Stone expressed their frustration publicly. Within a week, they had a $1.5 billion deal. The premiere aired. The first episode featured Jesus, warning the characters not to provoke Paramount. The show was commenting on its own financial entanglements in real time, which is very South Park. But it was doing so from a position of total institutional power. The complaint was not, "we might get canceled." The complaint was, "our premiere got delayed." The stakes had shifted from existential to administrative. And then there was the missed deadline. Season 27, Episode 5 was delayed by a full week. Parker and Stone released a public apology that read, "Apparently when you do everything at the last minute, sometimes you don't get it done." After 28 years of the 6-day miracle, the miracle finally cracked. The production cycle that had defined South Park's identity, that had forced the writers into a state of perpetual creative emergency, had hit a wall. The episode was late, the show apologized. And then it moved on. That moment might seem minor. A 1-week delay for a single episode is not a catastrophe, but symbolically it is significant. The 6-day cycle was not just a production schedule, it was the physical manifestation of the hunger that had made the Golden Age possible. It was the show's way of living in a state of constant creative urgency, of never having the luxury of coasting, of always operating at the edge of what was possible. When that cycle breaks even once, it signals something about the relationship between the show and the conditions that created it. The engine is still running, but it is showing its age. The broader empire compounds all of this. The Book of Mormon, which has been running on Broadway since 2011, requires ongoing attention and management. The streaming deals require the production of content on a specific schedule for a specific platform. The production company Park County generates revenue and obligations simultaneously. The comedy film project with Kendrick Lamar is in active development. Every one of these ventures is legitimate and interesting and the product of genuine creative ambition. And every one of them pulls a fraction of Parker and Stone's attention away from the thing that started it all. Unlike Seth MacFarlane, who stopped writing Family Guy entirely by 2010 and handed the show to a staff of other writers, Parker and Stone have stayed. That matters. It matters enormously. The show has never been written by someone else. The creative vision has never been delegated. But even the most dedicated creator has a finite supply of attention and energy. And when that supply is being divided across a Broadway empire and a streaming content pipeline and a film project and a production company and whatever comes next, the show that gets each individual piece of that attention is getting less than it got when the show was the only thing that existed. The Golden Age was built on total commitment from people who had nothing else. The later seasons are built on divided commitment from people who have everything. The first condition produces masterpieces. The second produces competent, professional, occasionally brilliant television that is clearly made by talented people who care about what they are doing. The gap between those two things is the gap between good and great. And in the history of South Park, that gap is the distance between Season 8, which holds the highest per season IMDb average in the show's history, and the seasons that followed, which range from strong to mediocre to, in the case of Season 21, genuinely poor. None of this is Parker and Stone's fault in any moral sense. They did not do anything wrong by becoming successful. They did not betray their audience by signing deals that reflected the enormous value of their work. They did not fail as creators by expanding their ambitions beyond a single animated show. They did exactly what anyone would do in their position. They took the success they had earned and used it to build a life and a career that reflected the full range of their talents. But the conditions that made the Golden Age were not something anyone chose. They were the byproduct of specific circumstances: youth, poverty, uncertainty, the absence of any safety net. Those circumstances produced a quality of work that abundance and security cannot replicate. Not because abundance and security are bad things, they are good things. But they are the opposite of the things that made the Golden Age possible. And you cannot have both at the same time. That is the paradox at the heart of this story. The Golden Age created the success. The success destroyed the conditions that created the Golden Age. The rescue and the damage were the same event. So where does that leave South Park? What is the show in total after 28 seasons, 338 episodes, 5 Emmy Awards, a Peabody, an Oscar nomination, a Broadway musical, a series of streaming films, a franchise that has generated billions of dollars in revenue, and a contract that guarantees its existence through the end of the decade? What is South Park when you look at the whole thing at once? There is a version of the story that ends with a simple verdict. The show peaked early, the creators got rich, the characters got worse, the format broke, case closed, move on. That verdict is not exactly wrong. Every specific claim in it is supportable with evidence. But it is incomplete in a way that matters because it treats South Park as a single thing that declined rather than as two distinct things. One that achieved something extraordinary under conditions that could not be sustained, and one that continued existing long after those conditions had disappeared. Those two things share a name and a cast and a theme song. They are not the same show. Let me talk about what the Golden Age actually achieved because it is worth stating plainly and without qualification. South Park, during its Golden Age, was the bravest show on American television. That is not nostalgia talking. That is a description of what happened. The show took on Scientology and lost a cast member over it. It took on censorship and depictions of the Prophet Muhammad and received death threats from extremist organizations and had 5 episodes pulled from all platforms permanently. It satirized both sides of the American political spectrum with equal viciousness at a time when most comedy was content to pick one side and stay there. It won a Peabody Award specifically for its willingness to provide distinguished and biting social commentary. That award was not given for animation quality or ratings, it was given for courage. The show was also, during those years, genuinely innovative in ways that the passage of time has made easy to forget. The 6-day production cycle was unprecedented and remains unprecedented. No other animated show in the history of television has replicated it. The ability to write, animate, and air an episode in less than a week gave South Park a relationship with current events that was closer to late-night television or news satire than to anything else in the animated world. The show existed in the present tense. It breathed the same air as its audience. When something happened in the world on a Tuesday, the show could address it by Wednesday. That immediacy was not just a scheduling trick, it was a creative philosophy. It meant that the show's satire was always fresh, always urgent, always pointed at the thing that mattered right now rather than the thing that had mattered 9 months ago when the script was written. The characters during those years were specific and alive in a way that later seasons would struggle to match. Stan was not just a straight man, he was a kid with a particular kind of bewildered decency. A boy who could see that the world was insane but could not quite understand why the adults around him refused to see it too. Kyle was not just a moral voice, he was a kid with a genuine sense of justice that sometimes tipped into self-righteousness, and the show was smart enough to make that self-righteousness both admirable and occasionally ridiculous. Cartman was not just a villain, he was a specific, detailed, fully committed portrait of a particular kind of human darkness, played with such total conviction that he became, paradoxically, one of the most watchable characters on television. Kenny was a running joke that the show was smart enough to recognize had an expiration date, and the decision to kill him permanently in Season 5, to play his death with genuine emotion, and then to reinvent his role in the ensemble showed a level of creative maturity that most shows never achieve. And underneath all of the profanity and the shock value and the crude animation and the relentless mockery of every sacred cow in American life, there was something that is easy to miss if you are not paying attention. There was warmth. There was a genuine affection for these characters and this town and the specific kind of chaos that erupted every week. When Stan delivered the moral at the end of an episode, it was usually something simple and true, the kind of observation that a 10-year-old might actually make. And it landed because the show had earned it through 20 minutes of honest storytelling. The moral was not imposed on the episode from the outside. It grew out of the story naturally, organically, the way insights grow out of experience. That combination of bravery and speed and specificity and warmth is what the Golden Age was made of. And it is the combination that success slowly took apart, piece by piece, over the following 15 years. Now let me talk about what the show became, because that is also part of the story, and it deserves to be told honestly. South Park in 2025 and 2026 is still producing episodes that generate cultural conversation. Season 27's premiere drew 5.9 million cross-platform viewers across Comedy Central and Paramount Plus in its first 3 days. That represented a 68% increase over the Season 26 premiere. It was the biggest Comedy Central premiere share since 1999. The second episode of Season 27, Got a Nut, drew approximately 6.2 million cross-platform viewers in 3 days. That was the most watched episode of South Park since 2018. The show won Best Animated Series at the Critics' Choice Television Awards in 2025. These are not the numbers of a dead show. These are not even the numbers of a declining show. They are, in certain respects, the numbers of a show that is experiencing a late career renaissance in terms of viewership, driven largely by the Paramount Plus streaming deal that makes new episodes available the day after they air on Comedy Central. The audience is there. The attention is there. The cultural relevance, at least in terms of the show's ability to generate headlines and conversation, is still intact. The critical reception tells a more complicated story. The show's IMDb overall rating is an 8.7 out of 10, which is excellent by any standard, but the per-season averages tell a different story. Season 8 holds the highest average at approximately 8.6 per episode. Season 25 holds the lowest at approximately 7.1. The Rotten Tomatoes scores are even more revealing. Season 5 scored 100%. Season 10 scored 100%. Season 11 scored 100%. Season 12 scored 100%. Season 16 scored 100%. 5 perfect scores during the Golden Age and its immediate aftermath. Season 20 scored 73%. Season 21 scored 54%. Season 23 scored 50%. Season 24 scored 63%. Those numbers describe a real and measurable decline in critical reception, not a collapse. The show has never become genuinely bad in the way that some long-running shows become bad. It has never produced a season that critics unanimously rejected. But the gap between the Golden Age scores and the later scores is the gap between a show that was achieving something extraordinary and a show that was achieving something competent. And competent for a show that once held 5 perfect Rotten Tomatoes scores in a span of 8 seasons is a kind of decline, even if it does not look like one on paper. The show's format has also changed in ways that affect how it is experienced. Early seasons produced 17 or 18 episodes per season. Seasons 25 and 26 produced 6 each. Seasons 27 and 28 produced 5 each. The total annual output of South Park has shrunk by more than 2/3 from its peak. For a show whose identity was built on prolific, rapid-fire output, this contraction is significant. 5 episodes every few months is a different creative proposition than 18 episodes every year. The urgency is different. The relationship with the audience is different. The feeling of watching the show, the sense of it being a weekly companion that is always there, always reacting to the world, always saying something new, that feeling is diminished when the show appears for 5 episodes and then disappears for months. The Paramount Plus specials, while occasionally strong, represent a further departure from the show's core identity. The post-COVID films, which showed the boys as middle-aged adults, were ambitious and sometimes genuinely moving. But they were streaming films designed to drive subscriptions to a platform, not weekly episodes of a television show made in 6 days. The economic function of those specials was fundamentally different from the economic function of the Golden Age episodes, and the creative work reflected that difference. They were bigger, slower, more carefully constructed, and less spontaneous. They were good. They were not South Park in the specific, irreducible sense that the Golden Age episodes were South Park. And the characters, as discussed in the previous section, have undergone transformations that the Golden Age versions of themselves would not recognize. Randy has consumed the show. Cartman has been softened and complicated in ways that undercut his essential nature. Stan and Kyle have lost their specificity. Kenny has lost his defining feature. The ensemble that was once one of the sharpest and most precisely drawn in animated television has become broader, simpler, and less specific over the course of 28 seasons of continuous production. All of this is true. All of it is documented. All of it is supported by the numbers and the critical consensus and the testimony of the creators themselves. And yet, South Park is still here. It is still being made by the same 2 people who made it in 1997. That fact alone is remarkable. In the history of American animated television, no other show has been continuously created by its original creators for this long with this level of direct creative involvement. Parker has written 325 episodes. He has directed 317. Stone has been there for all of it. They have never handed the show to someone else. They have never stepped back to let a new team take over. They have never taken a break and come back to find the show transformed by other people's decisions. The show that exists now is not the Golden Age show. It is something different, something less immediate, less desperate, less fearless, less specific. But it is still being made by the people who made the Golden Age, and that continuity means something. It means that the decline, such as it is not the result of carelessness or indifference. It is the result of specific, identifiable conditions that changed around 2 people who stayed the same while everything else changed. Parker and Stone know all of this. They have always known it. "You're getting old" was them saying it out loud in 2011. Sharon's line about the same shit happening over and over and resetting every week was the show's most honest moment of self-reflection. The fact that the episode aired and then the show continued for 14 more years, and counting, is not a contradiction of that honesty. It is an extension of it. The show recognized what it had become. The creators acknowledged the exhaustion and the repetition and the loss of the specific creative urgency that had defined the early years. And then they kept going because the contract said to keep going, and because people still watched, and because what else would they do, and because stopping something you have done for your entire adult life is a decision that requires a kind of courage that is entirely different from the courage of making a Scientology episode. In a 2015 interview, Parker said he thought the show would end with a fizzle, that it would end with some dud and they would go, "Fuck this man," and walk away. In 2019, Stone said he did not think they would be doing the show when they were 60. In 2025, they signed a deal that keeps them making the show until Parker is 60. The pattern repeats. They talk about ending it. They feel the weight of it. They express the weariness, and then they sign another deal. Because the deal is too good to refuse. Because the show still matters to people. Because the machine is too large and too profitable and too central to too many other things to be stopped by something as private and unquantifiable as creative exhaustion. And here's the thing about all of this that I keep coming back to. The thing that makes the South Park story different from the Family Guy story or the Simpsons story or any of the other show-peaked early and declined stories that populate the history of television. Parker and Stone are still there. They did not leave. The golden age ended and they were still in the room. The conditions changed, and they were still writing the scripts and directing the episodes and doing the voices. They watched the thing they built transform into something different, and they kept building anyway. That takes something. I am not sure what to call it. It is not courage in the traditional sense. It is not passion exactly, although passion is part of it. It might be something closer to stubbornness or loyalty or the specific kind of obligation that comes from having created something that millions of people love and feeling responsible for its continued existence. Even when continuing, it means making something that you know in your bones is not as good as what you used to make. Or maybe it is something simpler than that. Maybe it is just two guys who met in a film class at the University of Colorado, who bonded over Monty Python and dirty jokes, who made a construction paper cartoon about kids in a small town because it was the funniest thing they could think of, and who are still making that cartoon almost 30 years later because they have never found anything they would rather do instead, even when it is hard, even when they are tired, even when the same shit keeps happening over and over, and in a week it just all resets. The golden age of South Park was real. It produced 5 or 6 or 7 seasons of television that sit comfortably alongside anything in the history of the medium. It was made by hungry, desperate, fearless people with nothing to lose and everything to prove. It won Emmy Awards and Peabody Awards, and the grudging respect of even the people who hated it. It said things that needed to be said in a way that nobody else was willing to say them, and it did so with a speed and a precision and a specific, crude, brilliant, profane wit that has never been replicated by any other show. That show still exists. Those episodes are still there. You can watch Scott Tenorman Must Die Tonight, and it will be exactly as sharp and as disturbing and as funny as it was when it first aired in 2001. You can watch Make Love Not Warcraft, and it will still be the perfect piece of gaming satire that won the Emmy in 2007. You can watch the Imagination Land trilogy, and it will still be the most ambitious thing an animated sitcom has ever attempted. The golden age is preserved in the episodes themselves, unchangeable and permanent regardless of what came before or after. The show that continues to air new episodes every few months is a different thing. It is a professional, competent, occasionally brilliant machine that produces content for a streaming platform owned by a media conglomerate in the middle of a corporate war with other media conglomerates. It is made by 2 billionaires who care deeply about their work, but who are also managing a Broadway empire and a production company and a film project and a contract worth $250 million per year. It is good. It is sometimes very good. It is not the golden age, and it cannot be because the conditions that made the golden age possible no longer exist and cannot be recreated by any amount of money or talent or good intentions. Both of these things are true at the same time, and the distance between them is the whole story. If you have made it this far, thank you. If you drifted off somewhere around the $900 million deal, that is exactly what this was designed for. The story is over. The show is not. Parker and Stone will be back in the writer's room. The construction paper kids will be back in the classroom. The 6-day cycle will begin again on some Thursday morning in the near future, and Trey Parker will sit down to write another episode because the contract says so, and because the audience is waiting, and because after 28 years, making South Park is not just something he does, it is something he is. And maybe that is the real legacy. Not the golden age and not the decline, not the money and not the exhaustion. But the fact that two guys from Colorado who met in a film class and made a cartoon out of construction paper are still sitting in the same room, still doing the same work, still trying to make something worth watching. Even now, even after everything, that counts for something. Sweet dreams. Actually, before you drift off entirely, I want to go back to something, because I think there is a piece of this story that I have not spent enough time with, and it is the piece that sits at the very center of why any of that matters. It is the piece about failure, about what failure does to creative people that success cannot. I said earlier that the golden age was forged by specific conditions: youth, poverty, speed, creative control, fearlessness born from failure. But I want to linger on that last one, the failure part, because it is the most counterintuitive and the most important. The history of South Park before the golden age is a history of things going wrong. Parker and Stone moved to Los Angeles with nothing and struggled for years. They pitched shows that nobody wanted. Time Warped was rejected. They were eating cheap food and sleeping in apartments that barely qualified as functional. Stone was literally sleeping on his own unwashed clothing because the cost of a mattress was beyond what he could manage. This is not a detail I keep repeating for dramatic effect. I keep repeating it because it is the ground from which everything grew. The discomfort, the uncertainty, the daily experience of not knowing whether the thing you were trying to build would ever become real. That experience does something to a person. It strips away the cautious, calculating part of the mind that worries about what other people will think, that weighs the potential consequences of a creative choice before making it, that asks whether this joke might offend someone or whether this storyline might alienate part of the audience. When you have nothing, those calculations become irrelevant. What is the audience going to do? Stop watching? You barely have an audience. What is the network going to do? Cancel you? You have already been broke. You know what broke feels like. It is not as scary the second time. There is a specific creative state that this kind of failure produces. Psychologists and creativity researchers have various names for it, but the simplest description is this: when you have failed, truly failed, not the Silicon Valley version of failure where you land softly on a pile of venture capital money and try again, but the real version where you are sleeping on dirty laundry and wondering how you're going to pay for food, you reach a point where self-consciousness drops away. The internal editor that tells you this idea is too weird, this joke is too offensive, this storyline is too risky, that editor goes quiet. Not because you have overcome it through meditation or therapy or self-improvement. It goes quiet because you have run out of reasons to listen to it. You have nothing to protect, you have no reputation to maintain, you have no brand to be consistent with. You are just a person with an idea and the desperate need to make that idea work. That is the state in which South Park was created. That is the state in which the pilot was animated from construction paper in a cramped apartment. That is the state in which Jesus vs. Santa was made for a few $1,000s and distributed on floppy disks. And that is the state in which the Golden Age episodes were written, produced, and aired in 6 days flat by a team of 70 people working 100-hour weeks because the alternative was not having an episode ready for Wednesday night. Now consider what the opposite state looks like. The opposite state is one of security. You know the show will continue. You know the money will keep coming. You know that your job is safe, that the network needs you more than you need them, that your contract extends for years into the future. In that state, the internal editor wakes back up, not in any dramatic way, not as a conscious decision to be more cautious. It wakes up the way a reflex wakes up. You start thinking, almost without noticing, about what the audience expects, about what the network wants, about what the brand requires, about what the merchandise looks like, about what the streaming deal stipulates, about what the critics will say. Each one of those thoughts is tiny, each one is reasonable. Each one, in isolation, looks like professionalism rather than creative compromise. But cumulatively, over seasons and years and decades, they change the work. They sand down the edges, they smooth out the roughness, they replace the specific and the dangerous with the broad and the safe. They turn a punk rock band into a professional touring act that plays the hits and does not take requests from the audience because the set list has already been approved by management. Parker and Stone, to their enormous credit, have resisted this more successfully than almost any other long-running creators in television history. They still take on political figures, they still mock religions, they still say things that generate headlines and controversy. Season 27's depiction of Trump in a romantic relationship with Satan was not the work of people who have been cowed into submission by their own success. The South Park that aired in 2025 is still recognizably South Park. The edge has not been entirely removed, but the edge has been dulled. That is different from being removed, and it is harder to identify and harder to argue about. But it is real, and the audience feels it even when they cannot articulate exactly what they are feeling. The difference between a show that takes on Scientology, knowing it might lose a cast member, and a show that takes on Trump, knowing it will generate headlines and subscription revenue, is the difference between risk and strategy. Both produce controversial television. Only one produces the kind of television that makes people sit up and think something genuinely dangerous just happened. The comparison with other long-running animated shows is instructive. The Simpsons, which is the only scripted primetime animated series that has run longer than South Park, underwent a similar transformation over a longer period. The Simpsons' golden age, generally considered seasons 3 through 8, was also produced under conditions of relative uncertainty by a staff of writers who were inventing the rules of prime-time animated comedy as they went. As The Simpsons became a guaranteed institution, the show softened. The characters flanderized. The writing became competent rather than inspired. The comparison is not exact because The Simpsons' decline is usually attributed to specific changes in the writing staff and showrunner rather than to the same kind of creator burnout dynamic that affects South Park. But the broad shape is the same. A show that was extraordinary under conditions of creative uncertainty became merely good under conditions of institutional security. Family Guy, which South Park memorably parodied in the Season 10 two-parter Cartoon Wars, illustrates the comparison from a different angle. In that two-parter, South Park depicted Family Guy's writing staff as a tank of manatees, pushing beach balls with random words on them, assembling cutaway gags by chance rather than by craft. Parker and Stone were explicit in interviews that they genuinely disliked Family Guy's approach to comedy. Their argument was that jokes should grow out of character and story rather than being parachuted in from nowhere. It was a sharp and specific criticism, and it reflected the confidence of creators who believed their own show was doing something fundamentally better. What makes the Cartoon Wars episodes interesting in retrospect is that the criticism was accurate and also somewhat hypocritical in a way that later seasons would make clear. South Park's golden age did build jokes from character and story. The later seasons of South Park, with the expanded role of Randy Marsh and the contraction of the boys' storylines and the serialization experiments that sometimes felt more like obligations than inspirations, drifted closer to the kind of formula-driven comedy that Cartoon Wars had criticized. The show did not become Family Guy, but it lost some of the specific qualities that had made the criticism of Family Guy so convincing. The financial comparison is also worth making. Seth MacFarlane's net worth is estimated at roughly $400 million. He stopped writing Family Guy in 2010 and built an empire that includes films, music, and the Orville. Parker and Stone's combined net worth is approximately $2.4 billion. They are still writing South Park. The question of whether staying is better than leaving, whether the work benefits from the creator's continued presence even when the conditions around the creator have changed, does not have a clean answer. Family Guy without MacFarlane became a machine running on institutional memory. South Park with Parker and Stone became something more complicated, a show where the original creative vision is still present in every episode, still audible in every voice performance, still visible in every directorial choice, but filtered through conditions that have transformed the vision into something different from what it was when it was at its sharpest. The documentary 6 Days to Air, which premiered on Comedy Central on October 9, 2011, captured the golden age production process at what was probably its final peak. The film followed the production of a single episode from concept to broadcast in the show's trademark 6-day cycle. Watching it now, what stands out is the intensity, the focus, the specific creative urgency of a team that knows the clock is running and cannot afford to waste a moment on anything that is not essential. Parker in the documentary looks like a man who is simultaneously exhausted and electrified. running on a combination of caffeine and deadline pressure and the irreducible love of making something funny. That documentary was made 14 years ago. Parker was 41. He is now 55. Stone was 39. He is now 54. They have made 14 more years of television since that documentary was filmed. They have produced Paramount Plus streaming specials and Broadway musicals and film projects and signed deals worth billions of dollars. The 6-day cycle is still technically in place, but the men running it are not the same men who were captured in that documentary. They are older, they are wealthier, they are more experienced. And experience in creative work is a double-edged sword. It makes you better at the craft and worse at the recklessness. It teaches you how to do the thing efficiently and takes away the desperation that made the inefficiency productive. There is a moment near the end of the documentary where Parker talks about the terror and the exhilaration of finishing an episode just hours before it airs. He describes the feeling of knowing that what you made this week is going out into the world and there is nothing you can do to change it. That feeling, the terror-exhilaration hybrid, is the emotional signature of the golden age. It is what the episodes feel like. It is what the audience felt watching them. The sense that anything could happen, that the show was operating on the edge of disaster, that the people making it were running as fast as they could and might crash at any moment. That feeling is the thing that success took away. Not the talent, not the commitment, not the 6-day schedule, the feeling. The specific emotional quality of work made under conditions of genuine uncertainty by people who have genuinely not yet arrived. Parker and Stone arrived. They arrived more completely than almost anyone in the history of television. They arrived at $1.2 billion each, at a $1.5 billion contract, at 5 Emmy Awards and 9 Tony Awards, and a Peabody and an Oscar nomination. They arrived at a place where the show they created from construction paper in a cramped apartment is guaranteed to exist for the next 5 years, regardless of what they do or do not do. Arriving is a wonderful thing. It is the thing every struggling artist dreams about during the long years of not having arrived. It means security and comfort, and the freedom to do what you want without fear. But arriving also means that you are no longer on the way. You are no longer running towards something with the specific energy of someone who has not yet reached it. You are here, you have made it, and making it, as Parker and Stone's own show told us through the mouth of Randy Marsh in 2011, means that the same shit keeps happening over and over, and in a week it just all resets. That line is the truest thing South Park has ever said. And the fact that the show has continued for 14 years and counting since saying it is either the most depressing thing about the show or the most human. It depends on how you look at it. From one angle, it looks like a golden cage. From another angle, it looks like two guys who love what they do showing up to work even when the work is not what it used to be. I think it is both. I think most things worth caring about are both at the same time. Anyway, that is the story, the whole story, or as much of it as one person can tell in one sitting. South Park was extraordinary. South Park is still here. The distance between those two statements is the entire history of what success does to the things we love. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying however long you stayed. If you enjoyed this, a subscribe would mean a lot. It is free, and it genuinely helps. And if you fell asleep somewhere in the middle, good, that was the plan. Good night. And wherever you are in the world tonight, wherever you first encountered South Park, whether it was on a television in your parents' living room in 1997, or on a laptop in a dorm room in 2005, or on a phone screen last week, I hope you remember the version that made you laugh the hardest, the version that surprised you, the version that said something you could not believe a cartoon was allowed to say. That version is still out there, waiting in the episodes, unchanged by time or money or contracts or anything else. It is still exactly as sharp and as crude and as brilliant and as alive as it was the night it first aired. Some things success cannot touch.